The wind carried dust across the narrow road, leading into the lonely town, and each step she took felt heavier than the last. Folks in that place did not notice someone like her. She was just another quiet soul with worn shoes, carrying a sack that barely held anything worth keeping. Nobody knew where she came from, and nobody cared to ask. She kept her head low, hoping to pass through without trouble, but trouble lingered in every shadow of that town. They called it a place of opportunity, yet the streets carried rumors of secrets. Missing families and wealth that vanished without a trace. People whispered only when doors were shut and lamps were out. She felt those whispers brush past her like cold hands, and something inside her told her the truth was buried deeper than anyone dared to say. She had heard stories. On the trail that the town was ruled by a council that smiled to outsiders, but held iron grips behind closed doors. Men rode with badges that were meant to stand for law. But something about the way they looked at strangers felt more like hunters watching prey. Even the saloon, which should have been a lively place filled with music and laughter, carried an uneasy silence beneath the clinking glasses. Every face seemed to hide fear behind forced smiles. She had known fear her whole life, but here it felt different. It felt shared. Still, people pretended nothing was wrong because pretending kept them alive. She stopped near the well in the center of town and took a slow breath. Her throat was dry from days of walking, but she hesitated to draw water. A man in a long coat stood nearby, tapping his fingers slowly against his belt as if counting something only he could hear. His stare felt more like a warning than a greeting. She stepped away and walked toward the edge of town, deciding to find a quiet place to rest before moving on. She never planned to stay. She never planned to draw anyone's attention. But fate rarely cared for personal plans. The old cabin outside town looked abandoned. Windows cracked, porch barely standing, roof patched with tin that rattled in the wind. She pushed the door open and found darkness swallowing the space inside. Dust drifted in a thin beam of fading sunlight. She could hear slow breathing somewhere in the corner. At first, she thought it was an animal, maybe a wounded stray. But as her eyes adjusted, she saw a man sitting on the floor with his back against the wall. Legs stretched, hands resting on a cane. His eyes were open but unfocused. He turned his head slightly toward her footsteps, though she made barely any sound. She froze, not out of fear but confusion. His face carried strength, yet exhaustion sat deep behind it. She could tell he was not old, just weathered by something heavier than time. His hair was unkempt, his coat torn near the shoulder, as if someone had grabbed him hard. She wondered how long he had been sitting there and why he stayed alone in an abandoned place outside town. He did not speak, only tilted his head and listened to the silence between them. She stepped closer, unsure whether to speak or leave. Her instinct told her to stay silent, to keep walking, to avoid being tangled in anyone else's life. But the way he listened made her feel seen, even though he could not see her at all. He finally spoke, voice low and steady, like someone who once held authority. "You are not from here," he said. She swallowed. "No, just passing through." He nodded slowly. People who pass through often never make it far. The town takes something from everyone. He paused, gripping the cane tighter. "It took my sight." A heart sank. She wanted to ask how, but fear stopped her. She did not want to know. She had spent her life running from towns with stories like this. She had learned that answers usually came with danger. He lifted his face toward her, sensing her silence. "You can leave." "Most do." She stepped back, ready to turn away. But something about his words, his loneliness, and the raw pain in his voice kept her from moving. She had spent years living unnoticed, craving to belong somewhere, even if for a moment. This man seemed like he once belonged, but had been stripped of that right. She set her small sack down and lit a candle with trembling hands. The soft glow revealed more than she wanted to see. His wrists were bruised as if bound recently. His boots were dusty from being dragged rather than walked. A broken badge lay beside him, half buried under dirt. She could only see part of the engraving, but it looked official. Something that once held authority in the town. He noticed her looking. "They said I knew too much. I did not listen. Now I pay. She lowered her gaze. Why stay here? Because the truth still matters, he answered. Even if I cannot see it, I can still hear it. And I heard you move like someone who knows how to keep quiet. Quiet people survive. She wished that was not true. She wished she could be bold, loud, someone who fought back, but life taught her to hide. She had been poor since birth, living on scraps, always overlooked. She learned to disappear instead of resist. Yet something about his voice stirred a spark she never allowed herself to feel. He gently tapped the floor beside him. Sit if you want. Leave if you need. Just know that this town is built on lies. And lies fall when the right hands pull the right strings. She sat down despite her fear, pressing her back against the opposite wall. The candle flickered between them, lighting only fragments of their faces. He tilted his head again, listening to distant footsteps outside. Someone passed near the cabin. He held his breath and she followed. The steps faded, but tension stayed heavy in the room. They are looking for me, he whispered. She clenched her hands. Why involve me? I am nobody. He turned his face toward her voice. Nobody is exactly who they never see coming. The wind rattled the roof again. A horse neighed in the distance, followed by faint voices. She realized the cabin was not hidden as well as she thought. If the wrong men found him, they would find her too. She should have left when she had the chance. But for the first time in her life, running felt like the wrong choice. He raised his chin, sensing her inner conflict. If you stay, there is no turning back. Lies go deeper than anything you know. People disappear for less. She looked at the door, then at him. Fear weighed on her chest, but curiosity pressed harder. She might have been nobody, but for once she did not want to remain invisible. She wanted to know why the town feared truth. She wanted to know what he had lost. She wanted to know what role she was already stepping into. Outside, the voices returned, closer this time. Boots crushed gravel. A lantern flame cast shadows across the window frame. Someone knocked on the cabin door, slow and steady, as if they already knew someone was inside. The candle flickered, and both held their breath. He whispered without moving, "Do not speak." The door creaked as a hand pressed against it, and she realized staying silent might cost more than she ever imagined. The knock on the door was steady, each tap slower than the last, as though the man outside enjoyed the silence he was breaking. She pressed her back against the wall, careful not to let the candlelight touch her face. The blind man stayed still, his breathing calm but controlled. His hand rested on the cane beside him, not as a tool to stand, but like a weapon he no longer had the strength to swing. The knock came again, louder this time, and a voice drifted through the cracks in the wood. It sounded polite, almost friendly, but there was something sharp beneath the tone. "Evening," the voice called. "Heard someone might be staying here. May need a hand." She looked at the blind man, waiting for him to tell her what to do. His jaw tightened. The candlelight caught the scar below his right eye, a deep ridge that looked recent. He shook his head once, slow and careful. The voice outside chuckled. "I know you're listening," the man said. "And I know you don't want trouble. Nobody does." Boots shifted outside. Another voice muttered something she could not hear clearly. 2 men. Maybe more. She wondered how they found this place so fast. The blind man finally spoke, but so quietly she almost missed it. "They patrol every night. Looking for anyone who steps out of line?" She covered the candle with her palm to dull the light. The knock stopped. Silence stretched long enough to feel safe. Then the sound of footsteps drifted away from the cabin. But instead of leaving, the men positioned themselves outside like guards waiting for someone to make a mistake. She waited until their voices faded farther down the road, then let out the breath she had been holding. When she removed her hand, the candle flickered back to life. She whispered, "Why do they want you?" "They want to keep things quiet," he said, "and I am not quiet anymore." She studied his face, trying to understand how a man who could not see became a threat. His blindness did not look like something he was born with. It looked forced. She wondered who he used to be and why he carried so much weight in his voice, when he mentioned the town. He sensed her curiosity and turned slightly toward her. "I was not always alone," he said. "There were others. People who believed change was possible. We met in secret places like this, passed information, tried to expose what the council hid. But they found us. One by one." She lowered her gaze to the floor. She had lived towns like this before. Places where power belonged to those with guns, gold, or secrets. Places where speaking out meant digging your own grave. She had always chosen silence because survival mattered more than justice. Yet here she was, sitting beside a man who lost everything because he chose to fight back. "You led them," she said softly. He nodded. "But I failed. They paid the price." A cold wind slipped through the walls, carrying the faint sound of horses moving across dirt. She pulled her coat tighter and leaned against the wall, trying to gather her thoughts. She had been nobody her entire life, drifting from one place to another, living off odd jobs and quiet kindnesses from strangers. Her past was a trail of closed doors and forgotten towns. She never planned to stay anywhere long enough to be remembered. He rested his head back and spoke again. "You walk like someone who has learned to run without leaving tracks. You stay small, unseen. That is a skill they do not watch for." She stiffened. "It is not a skill. It is just life. Can be more," he replied. "If you choose." The words unsettled her. She did not want to choose anything. She wanted to leave and forget she ever met him. But she could not ignore the way his voice steadied when he spoke of truth. People with nothing left often held the strongest purpose, and purpose was something she never had. She whispered, "What happened to your sight?" He reached up, touching the scar near his eye. "A lantern was thrown into my face during a raid. They wanted to scare me, not kill me. Blind men cannot lead revolts." Her chest tightened. She pictured him struggling alone in the darkness, stumbling through the woods, hunted by the same men now circling outside. She wondered how long he had been hiding and how long he could survive like this. He continued, "They sent a message with my body. Left me at the edge of town. Folks pretended not to see me. People always pretend." She felt anger rising in her, something she rarely allowed. She had seen that kind of silence before. It was the silence that kept people alive but killed their conscience. He spoke again, quieter this time. "I heard them speak of a ledger. Names, payments, land deals, disappearances. Everything written down. Whoever holds that ledger controls the truth." "Where is it?" she asked. "They moved it." "I heard them. The sheriff has it now, locked away in a place only council members can reach." The idea of evidence made her pulse quicken. If such a ledger existed, the whole town could fall. But that meant danger deeper than anything she ever faced. She pulled her knees to her chest, debating whether to leave before dawn. Then she remembered something from earlier on the road. A wagon full of crates had passed her on the trail. The men guarding it wore badges like trophies and carried rifles polished cleaner than their consciences. They laughed about new land coming under council control. She thought it was nothing at the time, just men boasting. Now she wondered if the crates hid something related to the corruption he spoke of. "Maybe evidence was moving right in front of her," she said. "I saw something coming into town today. Looked guarded. Looked important." He leaned toward her voice. "Tell me everything." She described the wagon, the symbols burned into the wood, the men riding beside it. He listened like each word was another step closer to truth. When she finished, his expression hardened. "Those symbols belong to the mines. They are buying more land. Land that should belong to the families who built this place." She frowned. "Why does nobody speak up? They are paid with silence, or threatened until they break. Some disappear. Some change sides. Some just lose hope." She stood and paced across the room. She hated feeling powerless. She hated knowing she might walk away like everyone else. He sensed her movement and spoke calmly. "You do not have to help me. But if you leave now, you will carry this truth with you forever. And running will feel different." She stopped moving. He was right. Once truth reaches the heart, it becomes harder to ignore. She looked at him, sitting alone in the dark, holding nothing but resolve. She wondered how many times he had repeated this story to empty rooms. Waiting for someone with the courage to stay, outside a horse snorted again. The men returned, closer than before. The lantern light brushed against the cracks in the wood. A voice spoke, sharp and impatient. "We know you're in there. Come out now, and this stays simple." She froze. The blind man straightened, gripping his cane. She reached for the door instinctively, ready to bolt. But he raised his hand to stop her. "If you run now," he whispered, "they will catch you before sunrise." "And if I stay?" she asked. He tilted his head toward the voices. "Then we start something neither of us can turn back from." The door handle began to rattle. She held her breath. Knowing the choice she made in that moment would carve the path ahead, the wood groaned under. Pressure, and everything in her life up to this point, suddenly mattered in a way it never had before. The door gave a sharp jolt as someone outside shoved it, testing the latch. She could feel the wood shiver under her fingers. Her heart hammered so loud she was sure they could hear it. The blind man stayed seated, but his voice dropped into a calm that did not match the danger pressing in around them. "Step back from the door," he whispered. Slow and quiet. She did as he said, moving along the wall until her shoulder brushed the cold boards. The candle was still burning low on the floor, its small flame a dangerous signal. She bent, cupped it in her hand, and pinched it out. Darkness swallowed the room at once. Outside, the man with the smooth voice called again. "Last time I asked polite. Open up." She heard the scrape of metal. Maybe a gun shifting in its holster. Maybe a knife. Her throat went dry. The blind man seemed to listen beyond the wood and wind, counting the men by the placement of their boots. 3 of them, he breathed. One close to hanging back. "How do we stop them?" she asked, her own whisper shaking. "We do not," he said. "We let them think they still hold the reins." He straightened his back. "I am going to answer." She almost grabbed his arm to pull him down, but something in his posture told her he had danced with danger before. He knew these men, this town, this kind of fight. He rose careful and slow, using the cane to feel his path, and moved toward the door. The latch lifted with a soft click. Before she could protest, he pulled the door open just enough for a sliver of lantern light to cut into the darkness. She stayed in the shadow behind the hinges, pressed flat against the wall. "Evening, boys," he said, voice dry as dust. "You always knock this hard? Or is that just for old friends?" There was a pause. Then the man outside gave a short laugh. "Well, I will be. Look who found his way home. Did not expect you to be standing on your own 2 feet, friend." His easy tone could not hide the danger inside it. She saw the edge of a badge glint near the lantern flame. He was not the sheriff, but one of the deputies she had seen near the wagon earlier. "I manage," the blind man said. "What brings you this far out tonight?" "Thought you boys liked staying close to town where the drinks are free and the lies are thicker." The deputy chuckled again, but the sound was tighter now. "Word is you went missing from your nice little corner at the edge of town." Counsel was worried. "You know how they are. Always concerned about the well-being of their citizens." The blind man tilted his head. "Strange. They were not so concerned when I begged them to listen before." "We all have our roles," the deputy replied. "Yours changed. Council wants you settled somewhere quiet. Somewhere they can keep an eye on you." She felt a shiver crawl down her spine. Settled could mean jailed. Could mean worse. The blind man leaned on his cane. "And if I say I am just passing through and plan to keep going past sunrise?" The deputy shifted his weight. "Then I say the council does not like loose ends. They want you where they can find you. For your safety, of course." Silence stretched. The wind pushed dust against the side of the cabin. She noticed now the faint shape of another figure near the deputy, holding the lantern. A third shape stood farther back, rifle resting against a shoulder. The blind man said, "I am not alone tonight." The deputy's voice sharpened. "That's so? Who is with you?" He hesitated just long enough for her to feel the choice press against her chest. She could stay hidden and hope he lied well enough. Or she could step out and take hold of the story before someone else twisted it. Her whole life she had hidden, but hiding now could make her look like a criminal. When they eventually found her, she took a breath and stepped into the thin line of light, keeping her hands empty and open at her sides. "I am with him," she said. "I just needed a place to rest." "Road has been long." The deputy studied her. She saw his eyes move over her worn coat and dusty dress, the tired slump of her shoulders. She looked exactly like what she was, a nobody with nothing worth stealing. "And you are?" he asked. "Just passing through," she answered. "I saw the cabin and thought it was empty. I did not know he was here until I came in." The deputy glanced at the blind man. "You picking up strays now?" "Someone had to," the blind man said. "Town is full of them. You just stopped seeing them once you started riding with the council." The deputy's jaw tightened at that, though his smile stayed fixed in place. "Well, stray or not, council wants you looked after. There have been bandits near the road." "Dangerous times?" She could hear the lie. The danger was not on the road. It was standing right there with a badge and a lantern. "Council can rest easy," the blind man replied. "I am not planning any trouble." The deputy took a step closer. "The thing about trouble is, you never plan it. It just finds you. Tell you what, sheriff is holding a meeting tomorrow at noon. Council members and a few decent folks. You come along. We all talk. Settle any worries." The blind man turned his sightless eyes toward the open night. "And if I say no?" The deputy's smile finally slipped. "Then I drag you in myself. Council is done asking nice." She saw the blind man's hand tighten around the cane. For a moment, she thought he might swing, might choose this dark doorway as the place where his quiet resistance finally erupted into open war. Instead, he let out a slow breath. "I will come," he said. Her head snapped toward him. She did not know what game he was playing. Walking straight into the grip of the council sounded like walking into a trap. The deputy relaxed again. "Good. We will be by in the morning. 8 sharp. Do not wander off. Would not want you getting lost." He tipped his hat toward her, though his eyes never lost that measuring look. "You make sure he gets there, miss. Sheriff likes folks who cooperate." With that, he turned away. The lantern bobbed as the men walked back toward town. Hoofbeats followed. Slowly, the sound faded into the night. The blind man closed the door and dropped the latch. For a few moments he just stood there, his hand on the wood, shoulders heavy. "You are going?" She asked. "Yes," he answered. That is walking straight into their hands. Turned toward her, though he still faced a little past her shoulder. "If I do not go, they hunt me. If I go, they think they control the story. Either way, we move closer to what we need." "We," she repeated. "You stepped into the light," he said quietly. "You are part of this now." She bristled at that. "I never agreed to any plan. I was just trying to not get shot." He nodded. "I know, but they saw you with me. That means you are on their list. Maybe a small mark for now, but a mark all the same. You can still leave before dawn. It will not be easy, but you might make it out. Only you will carry this weight with you." She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the choice claw at her again. Walking away meant safety in the same empty life she always had. Staying meant danger, but also a chance to matter. "What exactly are you planning?" she asked. He moved back to his spot on the floor and sat down. The room was still dark, but she found her way to him easily now. She could sense his presence like a small, solid center in the emptiness. "There are cracks in this town," he said. "Not everyone on the council stands together as close as they pretend. Some are greedy, some afraid, some tired. People like that leave openings." She thought of the saloon she had passed, the way the bar owner avoided looking at the deputies, the way he polished glasses with a little too much force when they laughed. She remembered a woman at the well, glancing over her shoulder before whispering that rent had doubled again. Even the schoolhouse had felt somber. Children walking out with their heads down, teachers keeping them close. "Who can we trust?" she asked. "We start with those who are tired," he said. "The ones who have lost something because of these lies." "You mean families who lost land?" He nodded. "And the miners who go deeper every season but never see more pay? The widows of men who worked for the council and vanished one night. Even one of the council members has a brother who disappeared. They keep it quiet." She frowned. "You know a lot for a man who cannot see," gave a thin smile. "When you lose sight, you listen more. People talk when they think you are broken. They forget your ears still work." She sank down across from him. "So we go to this meeting, sit with the same men who tried to kill you, and pretend to listen?" "For now," he said. "But during that meeting, watch everything. Faces, hands, how they change when the sheriff speaks. I need your eyes as much as you need my memory." Her chest tightened again. Nobody had ever said they needed her for anything beyond sweeping floors or carrying buckets. Being needed for something larger felt heavy and strange. "And the ledger?" she asked. "The one with the names and deals. You think it will be there?" "It will be near there," he said. "Sheriff does not let that thing travel far. He keeps it close on days when the council gathers. He is afraid someone will steal his safety net." She asked. "Not yet," he answered. "We need to know where he hides it first. We need allies. Right now, we are a blind man and a stranger. That breaks nothing." Her mind drifted back to the road, to the wagon with the crates, to the hungry faces of the few children she had passed near the town church. If this place really sat on a web of lies, its poison touched every part of life here. She thought of leaving again. But now leaving felt like abandoning all those quiet eyes she had seen that afternoon. "Tell me about before," she said. "Before you lost your sight, before they broke your badge." He rested his hands on his cane. "I was sheriff once. Not for long, but long enough to see what this town could have been. Folks believed in law for a while. Then the money from the mines flowed in. Rich men do not like rules that slow them down. Council grew stronger, and I became a stone in their boot. They waited until I made a mistake. Then they turned the town on me." "What mistake?" she asked. "I trusted the wrong person," he said. "A man I thought wanted justice as much as I did. He handed my plans to the council. They knew every move before I made it." She studied him. Pain coated every word, but under it there was still something hard and steady. He had been knocked down but not hollowed out. "Do you know who betrayed you?" she asked. He nodded once. "He still wears a badge." Her stomach turned. "That deputy from tonight?" "No," he said. "A different one. He will be at the meeting too." The idea of sitting across from a traitor, pretending not to know, made her skin crawl. The main conflict in the town felt bigger every time she heard another piece. Corrupt council, greedy mine owners, broken families, lost land, and inside it all, a handful of people who still cared enough to risk everything. She looked toward the dark window. Somewhere out there, the people of the town were settling into uneasy sleep. They did not know two strangers in a broken cabin were quietly planning to pull at the seams of everything they had been taught to fear. "Try to rest," he said. "Dawn will come fast. And once we walk into that meeting, there is no going back to being nobody." She lay down on the rough floor, using her sack as a pillow. Sleep did not come easy. Her thoughts kept circling around what waited for them in town. Faces she had only seen in passing now seemed tied to a hidden struggle she could not yet see clearly. Somewhere in the middle of those thoughts, she drifted off. Outside, the night thickened. A lone horse passed on the road, rider hunched, hat pulled low. The cabin stayed quiet, but the air around it felt charged, like the pause before a storm finally breaks. Morning came with a thin layer of frost on the ground, and a pale light pushing through the cracks of the cabin walls. She woke first, startled by how quiet the early hours sounded. The blind man sat upright against the wall, as though he had not slept at all. His posture was calm, almost steady, like someone preparing for something he had already accepted long ago. She rubbed her arms, still unsure whether she had stepped into a fight that was never hers. He turned his head toward her footsteps. They will be here soon. She looked out through the warped window frame. The road was empty, but carried the look of expectation, the kind of silence that falls right before trouble arrives. She fixed her hair, brushed dirt from her clothes, but nothing could hide the truth. She looked like someone who belonged nowhere, someone with no ties, no voice, no place to stand. Yet today she would stand anyway. The blind man reached for his broken badge and slipped it into his coat pocket. Not to show it, but to remember who he had once been. "You ready?" he asked. "No," she said, "but I am going anyway." He nodded once. That was enough. When the deputies arrived, they came without greeting, just a short whistle to signal they were there. 2 horses, 3 armed men. She noticed that they watched her more closely now, as though her choice to appear last night made her dangerous by association. She climbed onto one of the horses offered to her, still unsure whether she should ride beside them or behind them. The deputies made that decision for her. They placed her behind, where she could be watched. The blind man rode in the middle, guided by a rope held loosely by one deputy, not to restrain him, but to make it look like he needed their help. The walk into town felt heavier than the walk out. Morning shadows stretched across abandoned wagons, boarded windows, and dusty yards. No one stepped outside to greet the day. Even the dogs stayed silent. She saw curtains shift as eyes peered through glass, then vanished again. People recognized the blind man but turned away fast, as though guilt could spread like disease. They stopped in front of the sheriff's office. The building was larger than most, with stone steps and pillars that tried to mimic importance. Inside, the air smelled of ink, cold metal, and wood polish. A bell rang somewhere deeper in the building, and men began gathering. Council members, town leaders. Men who looked like they owned more land than they could name. She stayed close to the blind man, unsure what was expected of her. The deputies guided them into a large room, where chairs were arranged in a circle instead of rows. That alone made her uneasy. Circles made it easier to corner someone. The sheriff entered last. He wore a fine coat, polished boots, and a smile that did not reach his eyes. He looked at the blind man first, then at her, taking in everything silently. "You came," he said. "That saves us trouble." "I do my part," the blind man replied. "Now I expect answers." The sheriff chuckled. "Answers come when questions deserve them. You have not earned that right yet." Council members sat. The room felt too small for all the power it held. She noticed how their expressions shifted when the blind man spoke. Some looked irritated, some cautious. One even looked nervous. The betrayal he spoke of lingered somewhere among them, and she wondered which face hid it. The sheriff folded his hands. "Let us speak plainly. You stirred unrest before. We gave you a chance to leave peacefully. You did not take it." "I wanted justice," the blind man said. "Not silence. Justice." The sheriff leaned back. "You led people into trouble. You pushed them to question decisions they did not understand. You cost families their livelihoods." He held himself steady, not raising his voice. "Those families lost their land. Their sons disappeared. Their wages vanished. That is not confusion. That is theft." One councilman slammed his fist on the table. "Watch your words. We kept this town alive when the mines dried. We bought land so investors would come. You call it theft. We call it sacrifice." She stepped forward before she could stop herself. "Sacrifice for who?" "Because the families living in shacks outside town don't look like people who benefited." The room shifted its attention to her. Some looked annoyed that an outsider spoke. Others looked uncomfortable, as though she said what they wanted to say, but never dared. The sheriff studied her with new interest. "And who are you to speak on their behalf? You arrived last night?" "You know nothing?" "She knows enough to see what you hide," the blind man said. The sheriff's jaw twitched. "Careful. You are outnumbered. This is not the trail where you can whisper stories and call it truth." The blind man raised his head. "Then let us talk about the ledger." A ripple of tension went through the room. A few men stiffened. One council member looked down at the table, hands shaking slightly. She saw fear there. Fear of exposure. The sheriff smiled again, slower this time. "What ledger?" "You know the one," he said. "Names, land deals, payments. The list of those who disappeared. The proof of how you built this town on lies." The sheriff stood, resting one hand on his belt. "Those are heavy accusations. Dangerous ones." The blind man stepped forward. "Then prove me wrong." Bring the ledger. No, a councilman muttered too quickly, then covered his mouth as if he had not meant to speak. There, the crack. She caught his eyes, and he looked away, guilt written across his face. He knew something. Before she could question him, a loud slam echoed through the hall doors. A new group entered. Miners, dusty, angry, eyes tired but fierce. They must have caught word of the meeting. The sheriff stiffened, not expecting them. The man at the front pointed at the council. We want answers. You promised wages this month. Now we hear the mines are closing and the land being sold. You think we will just watch quietly? More voices joined. The room filled with rising anger. Council members stood, shouting back, telling them to leave. Deputies moved toward the crowd, hands near their guns. The sheriff raised his voice, trying to control the storm. Everyone calm down? You want money you need to wait for, one miner shouted. Wait. We buried 3 men this season and got nothing but lies. Another stepped forward. His brother vanished last week. We want truth. Now. The blind man turned his face toward their voices. The truth is locked away. Sheriff has it. The crowd reacted at once. A push. A shout. Someone grabbed a deputy. The room exploded into chaos. Chairs toppled. Men stumbled. Council members tried to escape through side doors. She grabbed the blind man's arm. We need to get out, he said. We need to use this. He pulled away from her and walked straight toward the noise, guided by sound alone. She rushed after him, dodging men shoving past. The sheriff drew his gun and fired into the ceiling. The shot silenced the room. Dust fell from the rafters. Everyone stop, he barked. Nobody moves. But something had already shifted. The people had seen fear in the council's reaction. They had seen the sheriff flinch when the ledger was mentioned, and the blind man stood now in the center of the room. You can threaten us, he said. You can silence a few. But you cannot silence everyone. Not now. The sheriff pointed the gun at him. Deputies raised theirs too. The crowd froze. Tension stretched tight. She stepped in front of him without thinking. Hands raised. You shoot him, she said, and every man in this room will know you are hiding the truth. The sheriff hesitated. For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. The crowd held its breath. In that pause, an older miner spoke quietly. Where is it, Sheriff? Where do you keep the ledger? Everyone turned toward him. He stood on the edge of the group, face lined with grief. She realized he was the one who lost his brother. The sheriff looked cornered. His grip tightened on his gun. We cannot let this turn into a fire, one councilman whispered. Give them something. Oh, another hissed. We lose everything. Arguments broke out behind the sheriff. Their unity cracked fast. People saw it. The blind man leaned forward, voice steady. Tell us where it is. End this before the whole town rises. The sheriff finally lowered his gun just a fraction. His eyes darted toward a locked door in the back of the hall. It was unintentional, a flicker barely visible, but she caught it. She stepped closer, voice low but firm. It is in there. The sheriff's eyes snapped to her. Too late, the miners surged. Deputies yelled, council members fled. She grabbed the blind man's wrist. We move now, he nodded. They pushed through the chaos toward the back room, each step carrying them closer to the truth, closer to danger. Closer to a turning point the town could never undo. The door stood ahead, locked, guarded, and holding everything they needed to bring the town's lies crashing down, but reaching it might cost more than either of them was ready to pay. The crowd surged toward the back door, pushing past toppled chairs and shattered pride. She held the blind man's wrist firmly, guiding him through the shifting bodies. The sheriff yelled orders over the chaos, but his voice no longer carried command. People had stopped listening to him and started listening to each other. That change alone felt like the ground tilting beneath the town. They reached the back door just as a deputy stepped in front of it, rifle raised. He looked young, younger than he should have been to guard something that dangerous. His hands shook, eyes darting between them and the roaring crowd. Move, she said. He swallowed hard. If I let you do this, I lose my job. The blind man stepped forward. If you do not let us do this, you lose your soul. The deputy hesitated, then stepped aside, as though the weight of conscience finally outweighed fear. She pushed the door open. The room inside was small, no windows, only a desk and metal cabinets bolted to the wall. Dust hovered in the beam of light seeping in through the crack of the door. Left corner, the blind man said. Second cabinet. Bottom drawer. He used to keep it behind a stack of false ledgers. She stared at him. How do you know? I heard him talk about it the night they took my sight. He thought I would forget everything. She knelt beside the cabinet and yanked the drawer open. Papers spilled out in neat stacks. Receipts, land deeds, pay records, taxes, all official looking. But her hands moved past them to a thin, leather-bound journal, worn along the spine, pages stained with fingerprints. She flipped it open. Names, dates. Amounts of money paid to council members, families, evicted men, marked as removed or relocated. Evidence that every rumor was true. She held the ledger up. We have it. The room outside erupted again. The sheriff pushed through the crowd, desperation replacing arrogance. That book changes nothing, he shouted. You do not understand how much this town depends on what we built. You pull that out into the open, and everything falls apart. Commerce, protection, alliances. You think this place survives without powerful people backing it? The blind man stood tall, no longer hiding behind anyone. A town built on lies is not surviving. It is suffocating. We are cutting it loose so it can breathe again. The sheriff reached for his gun, but a miner grabbed his arm before he could raise it. Another stepped in front of him, blocking any escape. The council members shrank back, some begging for negotiation, others blaming each other. No one defended the sheriff now. The blind man turned his face toward the crowd. This ledger is not for revenge. It is for truth. We can rebuild what was broken, but only if we stop lying to ourselves. She looked around the hall. The anger that had driven the crowd seemed to shift into something steadier, something tired but determined. People stepped closer, not as a mob, but as a community. Some cried quietly, reading names of loved ones they thought abandoned. Others looked at the blind man as though seeing him for the first time. One woman pushed forward, her hands trembling. My husband worked the mines. They told me he ran off. Is his name there? She flipped pages. Tell me his name. The woman whispered it, barely audible. It appeared halfway down a list on the 26th page, marked with a harsh line and a single word beside it, removed. The woman covered her mouth, tears sliding down her face. The blind man lowered his head. I am sorry. If we had done this sooner, maybe he would still be here. The woman nodded slowly. Then do it now, for the rest of us. For the first time, the hall felt united. Council members were escorted out, not violently, but firmly. Deputies laid down their guns on tables, choosing sides with their actions. The sheriff, stripped of power, finally stood alone. She expected the crowd to drag him out or demand punishment, but instead, the blind man stepped forward and spoke softly. Leave. Not because you deserve mercy, but because this town deserves peace. The sheriff stared at him, stunned. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. He walked out quietly, escorted to the edge of town by those who once served him. No chains, no guns. Just an exile that would haunt him longer than any cell. As the hall emptied, she helped the blind man sit on the steps outside. The town was waking now, faces appearing in doorways, eyes full of questions. Some noticed the crowd returning with quiet resolve. The ledger held high like a symbol of something long buried. She sat beside him. What happens now? People will argue, he said. They will fight. Some will want justice fast. Some will want to pretend none of this happened. It will take time. And you? She asked. He turned his head toward her voice. I still cannot see, but I can walk among them now without being hunted. She smiled. Maybe I will stay. This town could use another pair of eyes. He let out a soft breath that might have been a laugh. You were never just passing through. You just needed someone to tell you that you mattered. She looked out across the street. The same dusty road that carried strangers now carried a future that did not feel directionless anymore. For the first time, she felt tied to a place not by need, but by purpose. She touched his arm gently. You led this. Even blind, you led them. Shook his head. No, you led them when you stepped in front of that gun. I only spoke. You acted. The moments settled between them like sunlight slowly warming cold land. People began gathering around, asking questions, offering food, seeking guidance. The ledger was carried into the center of town, not locked away again, but placed in the open where anyone could read it. Mothers traced the names of lost sons. Workers demanded fair pay. Landowners returned deeds to families who had been forced out. A new council formed before dusk, chosen not by money, but by vote. The blind man refused leadership, though many asked. Instead, he offered counsel, speaking when needed, resting when his past caught up with him. She worked beside the families who had nothing left, helped rebuild homes, helped dig wells, helped mend fences. For the first time, she lived somewhere with intention. People learned her name. They remembered her face. She no longer walked invisible. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the air smelled of fresh earth and burning supper fires, she sat beside him, outside the repaired cabin where they first met. He leaned back, listening to the sounds of a town breathing differently now. Do you ever wish you could see it? She asked. He smiled softly. I do not need sight to know when people are standing tall again. She reached for his hand, not as someone guiding him, but as someone choosing to stay. He held her hand gently, not with possession, but with shared purpose. Together, they faced a horizon no longer built on lies, but on truth they fought to uncover. And though he was blind, and she once felt like a nobody, they helped a broken town find its way again, proving that sometimes the smallest voices carry the strongest power when they refuse to stay silent. The wind settled. The town lights glowed, and their story found its ending not in destruction, but in rebuilding a future shaped by truth, courage, and hope.